You're very welcome back. Well, two energy providers have announced further price reductions as competition in the market increases. Meanwhile, Ryanair warned holiday makers will face higher airfares this summer due to capacity constraints. But what impact, if any, are these price fluctuations having on the cost of living crisis? Well, Fine Gael Senator Regina Doherty and Sinn Féin Senator Lynn Boylan have stayed with me, and they are joined by the founder and CEO of price comparison website bonkers.ie, David Kerr. And just a reminder about our nightly live interactive poll, which allows you to have your say. Tonight we're asking, have you noticed the cost of living crisis easing? You can vote online on virginmediatelevision.ie/vote or follow the QR code on screen, and we will bring you the poll results later in the programme. I'm coming to you first, David. So this move today by one of the prepaid providers and by Pinergy, the big question is, will it push the other providers to follow suit? Will we see a third cut in those pretty expensive energy rates?
Yeah, it's incredible, isn't it? The cost of our gas and electricity has never been really higher, and we're all feeling it very much in our household budgets every month. The good news that we've all seen a little bit from the end of last year and the start of this year is two things are happening. The first thing that's happening is standard prices are beginning to reduce, single or early double-digit figures, which is very, very welcome. But the second thing we're beginning to see, which we didn't really see at all last year, is discount prices are becoming available again. And that was sorely missing last year. So, for example, a customer might see a 10% discount or 10% reduction in their standard rate. That's great. But if they shop around, they can actually make that a 20, 30, 40% discount that they can avail of for free just by shopping around. So there's a massive amount of customers' loyalty that's not being rewarded. And that's the customer that should shop around and actually get the deals that are there.
As somebody who received a pretty whopper bill today, I have to say, the energy suppliers that have cut and have cut on previous occasions, have they actually passed on those savings? Should we be seeing those in our bills now?
So in our bills, we've come to the second of three of the credits, and it's worth pointing out that the credits really did their job well for electricity customers this winter. The reductions that we're seeing now, well, we're still at the second highest level of wholesale cost for electricity since 2020. So around about €100 per megawatt is the cost of generating electricity right now. It was the lowest in recent times in 2020 at €38. Now it's 100. So yes, we are seeing some of those prices being passed on to customers, not quickly enough. We do hope to see further reductions later on in the year. The two announcements today are very, very welcome. They join the back of a raft of announcements over the last weeks and months. But we do hope to see prices furthering to reduce for electricity and for gas for householders. But we are all on the back of record prices. And that's very, very difficult for us to continue to swallow.
OK, so cumulatively, how much of a discount now have we enjoyed? But still, how much higher are we paying than we were 2 years ago?
So about 4 years ago, we were paying on average €1,000 per year for electricity. It's now around €1,800. So we're still about 80% higher than what are considered more normal times. And those more normal times were during the pandemic, by the way. So it's since the war in Ukraine, since the wholesale price of gas has skyrocketed, we're still feeling those issues. And we're going to continue to feel them for another little while. Prices hopefully will return to 2020 levels. But right now, yeah, they're still about 80% higher than even that recently.
Even with the price cuts that we've seen, even with these two, and in some cases 3 price cuts, they're still 80% higher. So they're a massive increase in people's budgets, in their household budgets.
And even with the temporary reduction on VAT rates for energy bills from 13.5 down to 9 as it is today.
In terms of the wholesale prices not being passed on, what reason? What's the justification for that?
Well, there's only one real justification for that, and that's prices were locked in some time ago. And so what wholesale prices are when they're bought ahead by the suppliers, they buy, let's say, at €100 today for electricity, but that price is locked in for them and they need to pass that on to their customers for, let's say, 6 months. In 6 months' time, when all of that price has been consumed, the price could be as low as 38 as it was in 2020. And hopefully in the future, that will be the case. So it's price positioning unwinding is what we're slowly seeing happening.
OK, very briefly, Ryanair have come out today and said the summer flights are likely to go up by about 10%. But that is on top of really significant price hikes last year as well.
Yeah, so 17% increase last year. They're blaming this year on what they're calling, quite happily, capacity constraints, which is another way of saying the demand isn't is too high for the supply, so they can put their prices up. And so that's what they're going to do.
So it's about 30% increase over the course of about 2 years.
Yeah.
On our summer flights. Okay, to go back, I suppose, to these bills that people, don't really have a choice on when it comes to their electricity and their gas, and for a lot of people, their health insurance premiums. We'll be seeing great that our gas or electricity seems to be coming down, but our health insurance premiums, if you can afford health insurance, is going up today to Lynn Boylan. So in some households, you're getting a break, but then you're getting stung in the next bill.
Yeah, I mean, but what David is saying is not incorrect in that the hedging of gas is kind of responsible for high prices in energy. But even before the crisis, Ireland was more expensive for its electricity. And now we're now one of the most expensive in the EU, 70% higher than other European countries. Yes, we are an island, and we're heavily dependent on importing our fuels in. But there are other things that the government could be doing that would bring down the cost of energy for customers. One of those is around giving the regulator more oversight of those hedging practices, which happens in other EU countries. So they don't expect you to open your books completely. But at the moment, we just have to trust the word of energy companies that this is all down to just the fact that they banked in certain prices. The other issue is around the standing charges. The regulator has no control over that element of your bill. And
even though some of those standing charges have been reduced too, haven't they, David?
Some of them have. In fact, the government doesn't control pricing on any element of your electricity bill other than the PSO levy, which they abolished for the next 12 months, by the way. They also have control over the VAT rate, which they reduced from 13.5% down to 9%.
Well, the PSO wasn't abolished. It's in negative. It's in negative because we've more wind, and the wind was making high profits and paid it back. So, yeah. That's the nature of the way the energy markets are. But we are more expensive for renewable energy. So renewable energy is cheaper, but we're still the most expensive in Europe for that as well. So there's a whole range of areas where the government could be getting a greater handle on it, not just in the crisis, but just in the long term, to bring down the cost of electricity so that we're more in line with the rest of our European countries.
Politically, Regina, we don't hear this phrase, the cost of living crisis. We don't really hear it as much anymore. Does the government feel that people are now managing?
I don't think that's true, because it's something that comes up in my clinics literally on a weekly basis, or by emails that people come to me. A lady not dissimilar to yourself, obviously a lot older than you, received her gas bill a couple of weeks ago and it was €950. There are people who are still really struggling, and I'd be really surprised if the answer to your poll is absolutely they can still see the cost of living crisis. But I would disagree with Lynn. You have to look at what government has done, and Dave has talked about it to some degree. €2.6 billion in the last budget was to help people put more money back in their pockets, whether it's through tax cuts or USC cuts, or direct payments to the 1.3 million people who rely on the social welfare department, whether they're pensioners or single parents or whatever it happens to be, for their income every week. We've given 3 credits last year, 3 credits this year, which were really significant in making sure that people's ESB bills are more manageable. But we do still have an enormous price increase that hasn't been reflected on the fact that inflation has started to come back. The war, the impacts of it aren't as great from a financial perspective or from a supply perspective as they would have been 12 months, 18 months ago. And we're not seeing that in our bills. And this nonsense, sorry for 1 second, this nonsense of Ryanair saying, they have to put their prices up this year. They don't. They're choosing to do so because there are more people who want to fly than there probably is, the seats for the bums to be available.
But that's a choice. There's companies out there who are just hiking prices because they can.
We know that there are lots of companies that have done it.
But health insurance companies increased the profit margin from 4.4% to 6%.
No, sorry, the market is entirely regulated. It's exactly the same as what we're doing with broadband companies at the moment, and looking at the legislation to make sure that you can't just have an annual cost plus increase on a budget, on a plan every year. Of course, government are doing this.
The communications companies that are putting up their prices by 3% plus inflation is specifically prohibited in other markets. Central Bank of Ireland brought in front of them all sorts of insurance companies for doing what's called price signalling. Yeah. That's exactly what that is.
And exactly what we're doing is looking at making sure that doesn't happen. So
let's just
be very reactive to what still is a current cost of living crisis for lots of people in the country.
But with the health insurance companies, Fine Gael increased the allowable profit from 4.4% to 6%. So that is a factor in premiums going up. The energy credits are working. Yes, absolutely, they do help. But if you look at the figures, This time last year, 220,000 households were in arrear. This time this year, it's 250,000. So there are people being left behind, even with those energy credits. So we have to bring down the cost of energy overall.
What is interesting, David, about the people in arrears is the people in arrears for their electricity versus those who are in arrears for their gas. And those with gas bills in arrears, it's a far, far bigger percentage, isn't it?
Just under 1 in 4 are in arrears in their gas bill. 22% of all gas accounts are in arrears. 11% for electricity accounts. Now, obviously, that's because the credit was put on the electricity side, not the gas side, because everyone has electricity, not everyone has gas. So it was the fair thing to do.
But in terms of the amount that people are in arrears, we don't actually have those figures, do we?
We just know that they are in arrears. We don't know by how much, and that's actually very concerning.
Are you going to be able to do anything for those people, for those 22% of people out there, Regina, who have gas arrears?
So I think we've seen 2 budgets now of the government responding to what is a very unusual situation, and I think we've done a relatively good job, particularly when you look at the vast amounts of money and the spread of the response across the government. It hasn't just been on tax, or it hasn't just been to social welfare. We've had huge business supports. We've looked at different various sectors of the market. We look last week I saw, and I thought this was a cute phrase from the Minister for Transport, the rooftop revolution. We have an enormous amount of solar coming online. Now, actually, there's small things we could do there. If we wanted to have a new solar farm in the morning, you can only access the grid for 2 weeks once a year. We should be able to access the grid for 2 weeks every month if that's what you want to do. So there still are things that we can do to improve the supply of much cheaper, much greener energy to people so that it's less expensive and more affordable for them. And government are looking to do to change things like that. You can see the pan-European projects that are being worked on with regard to solar and wind, with Mediterranean companies and northern companies. We're doing everything that we can, but in the middle of the crisis, the government and the state supports will continue, because they have to continue as long as the crisis continues.
But you're simultaneously driving up electricity demand and making us more reliant on gas by the proliferation of data centres. That is affecting the cost of people's electricity bills. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. That is absolutely.
And I know we're never going to agree on
Regina,
whether the country needs data centres or not.
If we have a 20% increase in electricity demand, we have to get that electricity from gas, and the gas. Well, it's on Bonkers' website as well. Agree with me. So it's not just
people at home will just be wondering, I suppose, what's going to happen with our gas and electricity for the rest of this year. What is your prediction, David?
I'd say further reductions over the course of the year for standard rates and more discount rates being available to people who want to take them.
I just think, what percentage, how much is my pretty colossal energy bill going to come down by?
I would hope your average electricity bill would go down to roughly €1,500 from the €1,800 that it is now.
OK, so a further 30% reduction. OK, give or take. Now, let me just see our nightly interactive poll. Tonight's question was, have you noticed the cost of living crisis easing? Well, in fairness, you did predict this, Regina. The result of that poll was 10% of people said yes, 89% of people said no, and 1% of people are not sure. David, I wonder, though, when it comes to the election, and it's going to be this year, does cost of living, does the cost of your bills feed into how people vote?
I'd say absolutely yes. People are very, very focused on their households when it comes to their vote. And what
they have in their back pocket at the end of the month, if anything.
People worry about putting the roof over their head. So that's the mortgage rates that are increased 10 times. That is the cost of living in terms of their grocery bill, in terms of their gas, their electricity. People vote on their individual household basis as well as on the good of society basis, but that is secondary.
All right, look, we're going to have to leave that there for now. My thanks to David Kerr.